I welcome you warmly this evening to this English language premiere of The Mark of the Chemist. I will confess that I have been excited about this evening's program since I first learned that it was a possibility some months ago when Alessandro Cassin first brought it to my attention and asked whether we would be interested. It took me a little more than a nanosecond to reply. Alessandro deserves our deep gratitude for his remarkable efforts in making what was then an idea a reality. At the museum, we have always sought to present the most compelling and interesting programs in this magnificent space, and we have found that one of the best secrets to success is to find wonderful partners who will, from time to time, bring remarkable programs to us. And tonight's program is the latest in what is now a stimulating and fruitful partnership between the museum and the Centro Primo Levi. Tonight, we thank the Primo Levi Center and its gifted leadership, Natalia Indrimi, Executive Director, and Alessandro Cassin, Deputy Director and Director of Publishing, for being such good friends and valuable colleagues. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Natalia Indrimi.
Thank you, David Marwell, director of this wonderful museum. I really need to add to this that our partnership, which has begun a few years ago, has really become quite fruitful and important. And tonight, we particularly bring to the stage and to New York another partnership, that with the city of Turin. Every year, Centro Primo Levi presents a series of events dedicated to the latest studies and reflections by artists, practitioners, scientists, and scholars about the work of the Italian writer who has become known in the United States as a Holocaust memoirist, but whose span of work is really much broader and extremely relevant to the issues that our societies face today. I'd like to welcome a contingent of friends from Turin, and I will be very brief. The director of the Centro Internazionale Studi Primo Levi, Fabio Levi, one of the founding members and trustee, Dario Di Segni, the president of the Teatro Stabile of Turin, Evelina Cristillin, and director Filippo Fonsati. They have been extremely supportive and generous in joining us tonight and participating in this wonderful English premiere of the reading of The Mark of the Chemist. I'd like to also welcome to the stage the Consul General of Italy, Natalia Quintavalle, who has recently arrived and been nominated Consul General of Italy. And it's the first time that she participates in one of our events, and we have really established a long-lasting and solid partnership with the consulate, and I want to express my gratitude to the previous consul generals and to Natalia Quintavalle, who has confirmed the support and the friendship that we have previously established. Please help me welcome Consul General Natalia Quintavalle.
Thank you very much. I'm really particularly pleased to be here tonight for the opening of the 5th annual Primo Levi Forum, and to attend this reading in particular, a reading of a selection of Primo Levi's writing on science. I would like to thank the Centro Primo Levi, its president, Professor Alessandro Di Rocco, and Natalia Indrimi for offering me this opportunity, and the Museum of Jewish Heritage for hosting this important event. I found the choice of science as a focus for this year's forum particularly inspiring, because of the importance science had in Primo Levi's life, in shaping his perspective on humankind, and more generally for the role science played in the historical event of the 20th century. The Centro Primo Levi is contributing with this initiative once again in a valuable way to knowledge of the Italian recent history, of which the Italian Jewish experience is a very significant part. Primo Levi was a lover of Italian literary culture, especially Dante, but also Leopardi, Manzoni, and Petrarca. He was not only a witness, but also one of the greatest Italian writers of the 20th century. His writing is often described as scientific because of its precise, dispassionate, analytical quality. He said, and I quote, "From my profession, I have contracted a habit that can be judged in different ways and that can be freely defined as human or inhuman. The habit of never being indifferent to the people that chance has set before me. They are human beings, but they are also specimens, samples in a sealed envelope to be identified, analyzed, and weighed." I'm sure that we all will enjoy the reading of tonight by John Turturro and Joan Acocella. And I'm happy that new translation of all Primo Levi's works are being brought out next year, making his work available to generation new and old of American and English readers. Primo Levi was also at the center of a very important debate which took place in Italy after the Second World War on the role of memory in modern societies. And I'm sure that the reading of tonight will also improve our knowledge and understanding of our past and present. So, as Natalia said, as Consul General of Italy, I'm very proud of the collaboration which exists between the Consulate, the Italian Cultural Institute, the Italian Academic Institution, and the Centro Primo Levi. Let me just recall the important collaboration we have on the occasion of the Day of Memory on January 27th, an event which receives much recognition, I learned immediately when I arrived in New York, from New Yorkers and the international community. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Consul Quintavalle. And now I'd like to call to the stage the person who has established this opening night of the Primo Levi Forum, that every year brings the work of artists who have reflected and been inspired by Primo Levi to the New York stage. Dr. Claude Guez is very much a symbol of the connecting power of Levi. He's a scientist. He's also an art collector, and he has very much worked on the link between art and science. He's from Turin, and he was brought to New York by the tragedy of the racial laws in Italy. And he has always said that he tried to make the best of this event of his life. And I'd like to call him and tell us a little bit about how he decided to create and sponsor this opening night of the Primo Levi Forum. Dr. Claude Guez.
I'm going to be very brief. I want to thank Natalia and the Centro Primo Levi for the opportunity to be here tonight. And I will just say a few words about this event. I have, as Natalia mentioned, deep roots in Turin, as my mother's family was from there. And the fact that I've spent my entire career in science gives me a certain sense of kinship to Primo Levi and his own quest for understanding. Like him, as a youth, I considered that the scientific method and the insights that could be gotten from science were really the only path that could provide the clarity that we might need to counter the darker forces of human nature. The understanding that might come from scientific investigations would allow us, presumably, to communicate the essence of our humanity to each other and to prevent the horrors that had just been taking place, and that each generation seemed to visit on somebody they identified as the other throughout history. It seems that this dream was a bit of a simplification and has not exactly come true. What we see today are increasingly powerful attempts in our own societies for the systems that we ourselves create to deal with people as abstract entities and as consumers of one thing or another, all to be regimented, predicted, and controlled as just so many cells in so many spreadsheets. The truly human dimension of man is in danger of being vaporized, much as it had been before. I believe that the path to understanding will depend critically on the shared insights that we can have, and the emotions, the laughter, and the joy that we all share from art, that we obtain in art and music that are surprisingly universal. And the dialogue between the scientific and rational insights and the feelings that we have, not the theories, just the feelings, is the path to a deeper understanding. I hope these events are a small step in this direction. Thank you.
Before welcoming to the stage John Turturro, Joan Acocella, and Marco Cappelli, who will engage in more than a dialogue and a musical counterpoint, I would like to say a few words. Tonight, our dear friends and board member Andrew and Anna Viterna are not here with us. And I would like to dedicate this program to the memory of Alex Viterbi. Thank you very much.
It is most important to protect the eyes. Strong goggles with stout glass must be worn in all vacuum and pressure work when distilling. or evacuating a new desiccator for the first time. It's from my old university textbook, Laboratory Methods of Organic Chemistry. The author is a German, Gattermann, Ludwig Gattermann. In 30 years in the field, I have consulted it hundreds of times. I have learnt it almost by heart. I have never found it at fault, and no doubt it has kept me well clear of trouble.
Your copy of Gattermann was printed in Berlin in 1939, the year that Hitler started the Second World War. So even before Auschwitz, you had to face some dangers.
You know, that is what a chemist needs. They say that Freemasons used to recognize each other by scratching each other's palms while shaking hands. I would propose that when they are introduced to each other, chemists should show the palm of the right hand toward the center, where the tendon that flexes the middle finger crosses, what palm readers call the lifeline. The majority of them have a small, highly specific scar whose origin I will explain. Today in laboratories, even the most complex apparatuses can be set up in a few minutes by using integrated glassware. It is a rapid and clean system, and assembling is as simple as playing with Lego. But until around 1940, integrated cones were unknown or extremely expensive in Italy. Plugs of cork were used for retention. When you had to slip a tube of glass into a pierced plug, the glass often broke, and the sharp stump plunged into your hand. It would have been simple to warn beginner chemists of this small, easily preventable danger, but in some obscure tribal recesses of our nature survives an instinct that compels us to make sure that every initiation be painful and leave its mark. This one in the palm of the working hand was our mark, the mark of the chemist, still to some extent alchemists, still somehow members of a secret sect.
So on your right hand, you have the mark of the chemist. On your left forearm, you have a number that is the mark of Auschwitz.
My name was 1745-17. In Auschwitz, we have been baptized. We will carry the tattoo on our left arm until we die. Only by showing one's number could one get bread and soup. Several days passed and not a few shoves and punches before we became used to showing our number promptly enough not to disrupt the daily operation of food distribution. Weeks and months were needed to learn its sound in German, and for many days, while the habits of freedom still led me to look for the time on my absent wristwatch, my new name ironically appeared instead, a numbered tattoo in bluish characters under the skin.
Today, how do you live with this number?
My tattoo has become a part of my body. I don't take pride in it, but I am not ashamed of it either. I show it willingly to those who ask out of pure curiosity, readily and with anger to those who say they are incredulous. Often young people ask me why I don't have it erased, and this surprises me. Why should I? There are not many of us in the world to bear witness.
You often talk about the hands, the sense of touch, and the other organs of the senses. Once you said that you had chosen, I quote, not to tell the story of the grand chemistry, the triumphant chemistry of colossal factories and dizzying output, but that you were more interested in the stories of solitary chemistry, unarmed and on foot at the measure of man.
Yes, because this is the chemistry that has been mine. But it has also been the chemistry of the founders who did not work in teams but alone, surrounded by the indifference of their time, without profit, and who confronted matter without aids, with their brains and hands, reason and imagination. The hand is a noble organ, but school, all taken up with the brain, had neglected it. We should all know how to use our hands, our eyes, our nose. I'm very glad that I educated my nose. I'm able to identify by smell certain functional groups more quickly than the infrared spectrometer.
If This Is a Man concludes with a chapter entitled The Story of 10 Days, in which you describe how you endured from January 18th to January 27th, 1945, among the sick and dying patients in the camp's makeshift infirmary after the Nazis fled. What's recounted there reads to me like a story of Robinson Crusoe in hell, with you, Primo Levi, as Robinson Crusoe. What struck me was how much thinking contributed to your survival. Yours doesn't seem to be a survival that was determined by either brute biological strength or incredible luck, but was rooted rather in your professional character, the man of precision, the controller of experiments who seeks the principle of order, confronted with the evil inversion of everything he valued. Granted, you were a numbered part in an infernal machine, but a numbered part with a systematic mind. The scientist and the survivor are one.
You hit the bullseye. In these memorable 10 days, I truly did feel like Robinson Crusoe, with one important difference. Crusoe set to work for his individual survival, whereas I and my two French companions were consciously working for a just and human goal to save the lives of our sick comrades.
If This Is a Man reads like the memoirs of a theoretician of moral biochemistry, who has himself been forced to undergo laboratory experimentation of the most sinister kind, the creature caught in the laboratory of the mad scientist, and then your chemical examination in Auschwitz.
The door opens. 6 candidates will be examined in the mornings. The 7th will not. I am the 7th. I have to return to work. In the afternoon, it is my turn. Alex looks at me blackly on the doorstep. He feels himself in some way responsible for my miserable appearance. He dislikes me because I am Italian, because I am Jewish, and because of all of us, I am the one furthest from his sergeant's ideal of virility. He shows a profound disbelief in my chances for the examination. We enter. There is only Dr. Panwitz. Alex, beret in hand, speaks to him in an undertone. An Italian. Has only been here 3 months, already half kaput. He claims he's a chemist. I feel like Oedipus in front of the Sphinx. I am aware that the job at stake is important, yet I feel a mad desire to disappear, not to take the test. Panwitz is tall, thin, blonde, and sits formidably behind the writing table. I, Halfling 1745-17, stand in his office, shiny, clean, and ordered. I feel I would leave a dirty stain on whatever I touch. When he finishes writing, he raises his eyes and looks at me. I have since thought about Dr. Panwitz many times and in many ways. I have asked myself how he really functioned as a man, how he filled his time outside of the polymerization and the Indo-Germanic conscience. Above all, when I was once more a free man, I wanted to meet him again, not from a spirit of revenge, but merely from a personal curiosity about the human soul. Because that look was not one between two men. If I had known how to fully explain the nature of that look, which came as if across the glass window of an aquarium between two beings who live in two different worlds, I would have also explained the essence of the insanity of the Third Reich. I am a specialist in chemistry. I am a specialist in inorganic synthesis. I am a specialist. The interrogation began while in the corner, that third zoological specimen, Alex, yawned and chewed noisily. I took a degree in Turin in 1941, summa cum laude, and And while I say it, I have the definite sensation of not being believed, of not even believing it myself. It is enough to look at my dirty hands covered with sores, my convict's trousers encrusted with mud. Yet I am he, the Turin graduate. At this particular moment, it is impossible to doubt my identity, faced with my reservoir of knowledge of organic chemistry. I recognize it, the fever of examinations, the spontaneous mobilization of all my logical faculties, which university friends envied me so. The examination is going well. As I gradually realize it, I seem to grow in stature. He is asking me now on the subject I wrote my degree thesis. I have to make a violent effort to bring up those memories so deeply buried away. It is as if I was trying to remember the events of a previous incarnation. He shows me Gatterman's book, and even this is absurd and impossible, that down here, on the other side of the barbed wire, a Gatorman should exist, exactly the one I studied in Italy.
Your sequel to If This Is a Man is The Truce. It's about your journey from Auschwitz back to Italy. There's a legendary dimension to that tortuous journey, especially to the story of your long period in the Soviet Union, waiting to be repatriated. What is surprising about The Truce, which might understandably have been marked by a mood of mourning and inconsolable despair, is the book's exuberance.
Here I am, dressed like a derelict. Maybe I will get home barefoot, but to make up for it, I've learned German, a little Russian and Polish, and how to get by under unthinkable conditions. How not to lose heart and endure any moral and physical suffering. I'm wearing a beard to save on the cost of a barber. I know how to make cabbage and radish soup, how to cook potatoes in all sorts of ways, all without condiments. I know how to set up, light, and clean a stove. I've had an incredible number of jobs: mason's helper, ditch digger, street sweeper, porter, grave digger, interpreter, cyclist, tailor, thief, nurse, fence, rock splitter, and even chemist.
You appear to be someone whose most vital needs require, above all, rootedness in his profession, ancestry, region, language. And yet, when you found yourself as alone and uprooted as a man can be, you considered that condition a gift.
You know, a friend of mine told me many years ago, your remembrances of before and after are in black and white. Those of Auschwitz and your travel home are in Technicolor. And he was right. Family, home, factory are good things. But they deprived me of something that I still miss: adventure. Destiny decided that I should find adventure in the awful mess of a Europe swept by war.
In you, the language of the scientist and the language of the writer are the same thing.
Once at university, fired up by my own words, I even went so far as to tell my friend that Mendeleev's periodic table is poetry, loftier and more solemn than all the poetry we had swallowed in high school, and come to think of it, even rhymed. In the periodic table, every line ends in the same way with a halogen plus a rare gas, fluorine plus neon, chloride plus argon, and so on. But there is obviously more, the echo of great discovery, the discovery that takes your breath away, the echo of the emotion that Mendeleev must have experienced when he intuited that by ordering the elements, chaos gave way to order.
The periodic table is a book of poetry, a book of the transformation of chaos into order. In the periodic table, your book about the strong and bitter flavor of your experience as a chemist, you speak of a colleague, Julia, who explains your work obsession by the fact that you were shy with women and didn't have a girlfriend. But I think your real obsession about work derives from something deeper.
I do not believe that Julia was wrong in attributing my frenzy for work to my shyness with girls. The shyness was genuine, painful, and heavy, much more important than my devotion to work. I have never seriously tried to analyze this shyness of mine, but no doubt Mussolini's racial laws played an important role. Other Jewish friends suffered from it. Some Aryan schoolmates jeered at us, saying that circumcision was nothing but castration, and we unconsciously tended to believe it. I think that at the time, work for me was in fact a sexual compensation rather than a real passion.
In 1939, in your first year at the University of Turin, you are one of the few students chosen to get into the Chemical Institute and work in that inaccessible and mysterious place, the preparation laboratory.
The hour of the appointment with matter had struck. The first day, I was assigned the preparation of zinc sulfate. It was a matter of making an elementary calculation and attacking the zinc particles with previously diluted sulfuric acid. Concentrate, crystallize, dry with the pump, wash, and recrystallize. Zinc is not an element that says much to the imagination. It is gray and its salts are colorless. It is not toxic, nor does it produce striking chromatic reactions. In short, it's a boring metal. Something had escaped me, namely that the tender and delicate zinc, so yielding to acid, which gulps it down in a single mouthful, behaves in a very different fashion when it is very pure. Then it obstinately resists attack. One could draw two conflicting philosophical conclusions from this: the praise of purity, which protects from evil, or the praise of impurity, which gives rise to changes. In other words, to life. In order for life to be lived, impurities are needed. Impurities in the soil, too, if it is to be fertile. Diversity, the grain of salt and mustard, are needed. Fascism does not want them and forbids them. So take the solution of copper sulfate, which is on the shelf of reagents, add a drop of it to your sulfuric acid, and you'll see the reaction begin. The zinc wakes up, covered with a white fur of hydrogen bubbles, and there we are. The enchantment has taken place. You can leave it to its fate and take a stroll around the lab. For some time now, I had been hanging around Rita, mentally preparing brilliant conversational openings, and then at the decisive moment, did not dare and put it off. She was very thin, pale, and sure of herself. She was nobody's friend. No one knew anything about her. She said very little, and for those reasons, she attracted me. I tried to sit next to her in class, and she did not take me into her confidence, and I felt frustrated and challenged. I was desperate, actually, during that period. I thought myself condemned to a perpetual masculine solitude, denied a woman's smile forever. On that day, I was presented with an opportunity not to be wasted. I became aware of a fortunate circumstance. A familiar book jacket, yellowish with a red border, stuck out of the girl's bag. The image was a raven with a book in its beak. The title, you could only read I-C and T-A-I-N, but that's all I needed. It was my sustenance during those months. The timeless story of Hans Castorp in enchanted exile on the magic mountain. I asked Rita about it on tenterhooks to hear her opinion, and soon enough I had to realize that she was reading the novel in an entirely different way. Never mind, it could be ground for debate. It could even become an essential and fundamental discussion, because I am Jewish and she is not. I am the impurity that makes the zinc react. I am the grain of salt or mustard. Impurity, certainly, since the publication of the magazine Defense of the Race had begun, and there was much talk about purity. I had begun to be proud of being impure. In truth, until then, it had not meant much to me that I was a Jew. I had always considered my origin as almost negligible, but curious fact, a small, amusing anomaly, like a having a crooked nose or freckles. A Jew is somebody who does not have a tree at Christmas, who should not eat salami, but eats it all the same, who's learned a bit of Hebrew at 13 and then forgotten it. According to the magazine, a Jew was stingy and cunning, but I was not particularly stingy or cunning, nor was my father. So there was plenty to discuss with Rita, but the conversation I had in mind didn't strike a spark. I soon realized that Rita was different from me. She was not a grain of mustard. She was the daughter of a poor, sickly storekeeper. For her, the university was not at all the temple of knowledge. It was a thorny and difficult path that led to a degree, a job, and regular pay. All this did not put a distance between us. On the contrary, I found it admirable, like everything that was part of her. Her not very well cared for, rough-looking hands, her modest dress, her steady gaze, her concrete sadness, the reserve with which she accepted my remarks. I asked Rita to let me walk her home. It was dark and her home was not close by. The goal that I had set myself was objectively modest, but it seemed to me incomparably audacious. I hesitated half of the way and felt on burning coals and intoxicated myself and her with disjointed, breathless talk. Finally, trembling with emotion, I slipped my arm under hers. Rita did not pull away, nor did she return the pressure, but I fell into step with her and felt exhilarated and victorious. It seemed to me that I had won a small but decisive battle against the darkness, the emptiness, and the hostile years that lay ahead.
Arbeit macht frei, work sets free, are the words inscribed by the Nazis over the gate of Auschwitz. But work in Auschwitz is a horrifying parody of work, useless and senseless, labor as punishment leading to agonizing death. It's possible to view your entire literary labor as dedicated to give back to work its humane meaning, reclaiming the word Arbeit from the derisory cynicism with which your Auschwitz employers had disfigured it. A few years later, you would find yourself in another chemical laboratory in the most unexpected of places, at Buna, the synthetic rubber factory set up by the German company IG Farben inside Auschwitz.
Well, we entered the laboratory timid, suspicious, and bewildered like three wild beasts slinking into a large city. How clean and polished the floor was. A laboratory, surprisingly, like any other laboratory. 3 long workbenches covered with hundreds of familiar objects. The glass instruments dripping in a corner, the precision balance, the weak aromatic smell of organic chemistry laboratories. For a moment, the large shadowy room at the university, my 4th year, the mild Italian May air, came back to me with brutal violence and immediately vanished. Every morning now, when the squads are divided, the capo calls the 3 of us from the laboratory before all the others. In the camp, evenings and mornings, nothing distinguishes me from the flock. But during the week, during the day at work, I am warm and under shelter, and nobody beats me. In the mornings, as I escape the raging wind and cross the doorstep of the laboratory, here it is, the companion of my moments of respite. The pain of remembering, the old ferocious suffering of feeling like a man again, which attacks me like a dog the moment my consciousness emerges out of gloom. Then I take my pencil and notebook and write what I know I wouldn't tell to anyone.
This means that you began to write If This Is a Man inside that chemistry lab in Auschwitz?
Yes, but I destroyed my notes after I wrote them. If they had found them on me, they would have killed me on the spot.
And much later, when you were working in the factory, were you writing?
I wrote several chapters of If This Is a Man right there in the factory during lunch break. But a chemist working for a company has to write on his job, and there is a connection between these two kinds of writings. I lived my camp life as rationally as I could, and I wrote If This Is a Man struggling to explain to others and to myself the events I had been involved in, but with no definitive literary intention. My model was that of the weekly report commonly used in factories. It must be precise, concise, and written in a language comprehensible to everyone, and certainly not in scientific jargon. By the way, I'm not a scientist, nor have I ever been. I did want to become one, but the war and the camp prevented me. I had to limit myself to being a technician.
Was factory work useful to your writing?
These are the gifts that the chemist offers the writer. The habit of penetrating matter, of wanting to know its composition and structure, foreseeing its properties and behavior, leads to an insight, a mental habit of concreteness and concision, the constant desire not to stop at the surface of things. Chemistry is the art of separating, weighing, and distinguishing. These are three useful exercises also for the writer who sets out to describe events or give body to his imagination. Moreover, this is an immense patrimony of metaphors that the writer can take from chemistry. On the plane of comparisons, the chemist finds himself in possession of unsuspected wealth, black as, bitter as, viscous, tenacious, heavy, fetid, fluid, volatile, inert, flammable. These are all qualities the chemist knows well. For each of them, he knows how to choose a substance which contains it to a prominent and exemplary degree. Even a layman knows what to filter, crystallize, and distill means, but he does not know the emotions that are tied to these gestures, has not perceived the symbolic shadow they cast.
Distilling?
Distilling is beautiful. It is a slow, philosophical, and silent occupation. It keeps you busy, but it gives you time to think of other things, somewhat like riding a bike. It involves a metamorphosis from liquid to vapor, then back to liquid. In this double journey, purity is attained, an ambiguous and fascinating condition, which starts with chemistry and goes farther.
There is another great Italian scientist and writer who sang the praises of impurity, Galileo.
I, Galileo, I have seen two-horned Venus traveling gently in the sky. I have seen valleys and mountains on the moon, Saturn with its three bodies.
Among the jobs that you happen to do, you mentioned thieving. I'd like to know more about that.
It was in Auschwitz. I was a chemist in a laboratory, and I stole in order to eat. If you do not begin as a child, learning how to steal is not easy. It had taken me several months before I could repress the moral commandments and acquire the necessary techniques. I stole whenever I could, but slyly, quietly, without exposing myself. I stole everything except the bread of my companions. From the point of view of substances that you could steal with profit, that laboratory was virgin territory waiting to be explored. There was a mysterious jar on one of the shelves. It contained about 20 gray, hard, colorless, tasteless little rods and did not have a label. And this was very strange because Germans never forget labels. I certainly did not have the equipment or tranquility necessary to identify the nature of those small rods. Just to be sure, I hid 3 in my pocket and carried them with me that evening into the camp. I showed them to my friend Alberto. He took a penknife and he tried to cut into one of them. It was hard and it resisted the blade. He tried to scrape it. We heard a slight sputtering and saw a spray of yellow sparks. At this point, diagnosis was easy. It was iron cerium, the alloy from which flints of cigarette lighters were made. I felt skeptical about the commercial possibility of my stolen goods. In the camp, matches, though illegal, were certainly not scarce. That evening, I brought the small rods into camp and brought Alberto a metal plate with a round hole. It was the caliber to which we had to thin down the rods in order to transform them into flints, and therefore bread. How? With a knife on the sly. When? At night. Where? In the wooden hut, under the blankets, running the risk of starting a fire and, more realistically, of being hanged. But the camp had given us a crazy familiarity with danger and death, and risking the noose in order to eat more seemed to us a logical, indeed an obvious choice. We kept the blanket raised with our knees, and beneath that improvised tent, scraped away at the small rods, blindly and by touch. At each stroke, you heard a slight crackle and saw a spray of yellow sparks spurt up.
I would like to end this conversation by bringing up the period in your life right before Auschwitz. In Milan, you were part of a group of 7 friends, young men and women, all Jews like you. A few months later, Mussolini fell, and you went up into the mountains to fight in the resistance.
Well, we were cold and hungry, the most disarmed partisans in Piedmont, probably also the most unprepared.
I'm interested in a project you had in your mind from your Milan days. You wanted to write a story with a very special main character.
It was my literary dream, insistently dreamed in an hour and a place where my life was not worth much. Yes, I wanted to tell the story of an atom of carbon, to make people understand the solemn poetry known only to chemists of chlorophyll photosynthesis.
You wrote the story many years later. It is called Carbon, and it is the last story in the periodic table.
Our character lies for hundreds of millions of years, bound to 3 atoms of oxygen and 1 of calcium, in the form of limestone. It already has a very long cosmic history behind it. Time does not exist for it, or exist only in the form of sluggish variations in temperature, if its position is not too far from the Earth's surface. It is congealed in an internal present, barely scratched by the moderate quivers of thermal agitation. It lies on the surface, within reach of man and his pickaxe. At any moment, a blow of the pickaxe can detach it and send it on its way to the lime kiln, plunging it into the world of things that change. There it was roasted until it separated from the calcium, which remained with its feet on the ground and went to meet a less brilliant destiny. Still firmly clinging to 1 to 2 of its 3 former oxygen companions, the carbon atom exited from the chimney and took the path of the air. Its story, which once was immobile, now turned tumultuous. It was caught by the wind, flung down to the earth, lifted 10 kilometers high. It was breathed in by a falcon, descending into its precipitous lungs, but did not penetrate its rich blood, and was expelled. It dissolved 3 times in the water of the sea, once in the water of a cascading torrent, and again was expelled. It traveled with the wind for 8 years, now high, now low, on the sea and among the clouds, over forests, deserts, and limitless expanses of ice. And then it stumbled into capture and the organic adventure. The atom was therefore born by the wind along a row of vines. It had the good fortune to brush against a leaf and be nailed there by a ray of sun. Our atom of carbon enters the leaf, colliding with innumerable molecules of nitrogen and oxygen. It receives a decisive message from the sky in the flashing form of a packet of solar light. In an instant, like an insect caught by a spider, it is separated from its oxygen, combined with hydrogen and phosphorus, and finally inserted into a chain, the chain of life. All this happens swiftly, in silence, at the temperature and pressure of the atmosphere. But there is more. Carbon dioxide, that is, the aerial form of carbon, this gas which constitutes the raw material of life and the ultimate destiny of all flesh, is not one of the principal components of air, but rather a ridiculous remnant, an impurity, 30 times less abundant than argon, which nobody even notices. From this ever-renewed impurity of the air we come, animals, plants, and the human species, with our 4 billion discordant opinions, our millenniums of history, our wars and shames, nobility and pride. Now our atom is inserted. It is a part of a structure in an architectural sense. It has become relegated and tied to 5 companions. It is a beautiful ring-shaped structure, an almost regular hexagon, subjected to complicated exchanges and balances with the water in which it is dissolved. To remain dissolved is both the obligation and privilege of all substances destined to change. It now forms part of a molecule of glucose, a fate that is neither fish nor fowl, but is intermediary, preparing it for its first contact with the animal world. Hence it travels at the slow pace of vegetal juices from the leaf through the pestle and by the shoot to the trunk, and from here descends to the almost ripe bunch of grapes, then reaches the wine without changing its nature. It is the destiny of wine to be drunk, and it is the destiny of glucose to be oxidized. But it was not oxidized immediately. His drinker kept it in his liver for more than a week, curled up and tranquil, as a reserve element for a sudden effort, an effort that he was forced to make the following Sunday, pursuing a bolting horse. Farewell to the hexagon structure. In the space of a few instants, the skein was unwound and became glucose again, but was then dragged by the bloodstream all the way to a minute muscle fiber in the thigh, and here brutally split into 2 molecules of lactic acid, the grim harbinger of fatigue. Some minutes later, the panting of the lungs was able to supply the oxygen necessary to quietly oxidize the latter. So a new molecule of carbon dioxide returned to the atmosphere, and a parcel of the energy that the sun had handed to the vine shoot passed from the state of chemical energy to that of mechanical energy, and therefore settled down in the slothful condition of heat, warming up imperceptibly the air moved by the running and the blood of the runner. Such is life, a downgrading of the course of energy from its noble solar form to the degraded one of low temperature heat. In this downward course, which leads to equilibrium and thus death, life draws a bend and nests in it. Our atom is again carbon dioxide. Once again, the wind, which this time travels far, sails over the Apennines and the Adriatic, Greece, the Aegean, and Cyprus. We are over Lebanon, and the dance is repeated. The atom is now trapped in a structure that promises to last for a long time. It is in the venerable trunk of a cedar. It passes again through the stages we have described, and the glucose it is a part of belongs, like the bead of a rosary, to a long chain of cellulose. This is no longer the hallucinatory and geological fixity of rock. This is no longer millions of years, but we can easily speak of centuries, because the cedar is a tree of great longevity. Let us say that after 20 years, a woodworm has taken interest in it. It has dug its tunnel between trunk and bark with the obstinate, blind veracity of its race. As it drills, it grows, and its tunnel grows with it. Then it has formed a pupa, and in the spring, it has come out in the shape of an ugly gray moth, which is now drying in the sun, confused and dazzled by the splendor of the day. Our atom is one of the insect's 1,000 eyes, contributing to the summary and crude vision with which it orients itself in space. The insect is fecundated, lays its eggs, and dies. The small cadaver lies in the woods, emptied of its fluids, but the carapace resists for a long time, almost indestructible. The sun and snow return above it without injuring it. It is buried by dead leaves. It has become a thing. But the death of atoms, unlike ours, is never irrevocable. Here are at work the untiring, indivisible grave diggers of the undergrowth, the microorganisms of the humus. The carapace, with his eyes by now blind, has slowly disintegrated, and the ex-drinker, ex-cedar, ex-woodworm has once again taken wing. For 200 years, every atom of carbon that is not congealed in stable materials enters and re-enters the cycle of life through the narrow door of photosynthesis. It is again among us in a glass of milk. It is inserted in a complex long chain such that most of its links are accepted by the human body. It is swallowed, and since every living structure harbors a savage distrust toward contributions of any live material, this chain is meticulously broken apart, and the fragments, one by one, are accepted or rejected. The one that concerns us, crosses the intestinal threshold and enters the bloodstream. It migrates, knocks at the door of a nerve cell, enters, and supplants the carbon that was here. This cell belongs to a brain, and it is my brain, the brain of me, who is writing. The cell in question, and within it the atom in question, is in charge of my writing in a gigantic, minuscule game that nobody has yet described. It is that which at this instant makes my hand run along a certain path on the paper, mark it with these volutes that are signs, a double snap up and down between two levels of energy, guides this hand of mine to impress on the paper this dot here, this one. So many errors.
I would like to thank Joan Acocella, John Turturro, and Marco Cappelli for bringing to the stage Primo Levi's quest to comprehend life and the way we try to comprehend it. I also like to thank my colleague Alessandro Cassin, who has really worked marvelously at the English adaptation of the text that Domenico Scarpa has assembled and that will be performed again at the Teatro Stabile in Turin in April on the occasion of the 25th anniversary of Primo Levi's death.